Hey, if you are starting a new podcast or rebranding an existing show, I've got a few tips for you that will make protecting yourself against unfair competition just a little bit easier. Hi, I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and I help creatives and business people in the podcasting industry to cover their legal bases and protect themselves and the things that they create. And this is Legit Podcast Pro, a short weekly show where I offer you legal tips and information and strategies and answer your questions so you can grow your podcast like a pro. So stay tuned for those tips right now. All right. Recently, I have had a couple of situations come up that arise from using certain words when naming podcasts. So don't use these words in your title. So here we go. If the first word is the. If you are choosing a brand for your show, be absolutely certain that you will always be using the article the as part of it, like I do for The Podcast Lawyer. I use that as a way to brand me as the only podcast lawyer. But if you are naming your show something like Gas Grill Chef, you might not want always to have to call it The Gas Grill Chef in writing and on screen and when you talk about it. So think hard about it before you settle on your artwork and title, because using the word the can cause you to have to rebrand things later on, and that can be a problem. And if you plan to register a trademark for your show title, that word the can make trouble if you don't use it every time that you refer to your show. So be really thoughtful about that. It doesn't do any good to have the word the in there anyway. Now, of course, in the middle of the title, it may make sense given the context, but there you go. Now, another word that you really should not use in your podcast title, except under a very narrow set of circumstances, is podcast. We already know it's a podcast, so adding the word into the formal legal title of the show doesn't add anything to the equation. Now, my show, Entertainment Law Update, would gain nothing by calling it all the time Entertainment Law Update Podcast, right? And if you include the word podcast in your title, you actually increase your chances that your trademark application for that title, when you get around to doing that, will be rejected on the grounds that the title is descriptive, since podcast effectively describes the goods and services that you are offering under that title. So unless you are podcasting about podcasts and you're using the word more particularly, such as I am here with Legit Podcast Pro, or maybe you're saying you're calling your show Podcast Industry Report or something like that, just leave it out. If it's at the end of the name, it's not necessary. So choosing a title for your show is this super important step in launching and growing a podcast. But if you really want to stand out and be remembered, what you need to do is choose a title that is distinctive. Distinctive means it sets your show apart in the minds of the audience. It shouldn't be generic or too descriptive of the show's subject or content. Save that for the subtitle or the tagline or the show description. And please leave words like the and podcast off of the beginning or the ends of your titles. They do nothing to help, and they can sometimes hurt your efforts to protect that distinctive title that you've selected. So I see a couple comments. User saying hello from Nashville, Tennessee. Such a tiny space. You got to make the most of the little square. Podcast is just redundant. Yes, exactly. On that podcast artwork, having the word podcast doesn't do you any good unless, again, the show is about podcasting. Genus, thanks for your comment too, and I love your artwork, your profile picture. That's awesome. So listen, I am Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and this is it for this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. This episode, as all, are brought to you by the free Legit Podcast Pro community, where we help each other grow and prosper with our podcasting ventures. So join now. Visit legitpodcastpro.com. It's free, and it's a great place to have you. Welcome to the listener from Nigeria who is popping into Facebook to say so. That's wonderful. So that's it for this episode. Thank you for being here. I'll be back again next week, Thursday, sometime between 4 and 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or Pacific Daylight Time. And until then, I'll see you again really, really soon. Thanks for being here.